Hey, let's talk about neurons. And as we do, we're going to answer a couple questions like what types of cells make up the nervous system, what are multipolar and pseudo-unipolar neurons, and what are the roles of the different types of neurons like the somatic motor and visceral motor neurons and the visceral sensory and general sensory neurons. There are two main types of cells that make up nervous tissue. One type are neurons or nerve cells, and they're excitable cells that relay information and they allow for that rapid communication. Then the second type are the neuroglia or the glial cells, and those are cells that structurally support neurons, and there are actually 5 times more glial cells than there are neurons in the nervous system. We're going to talk a lot more about neurons in this lecture, but just know that the glial cells play a really critical role in allowing the neurons to do what they do. So let's classify these different types of neurons based off of their structural neuron type and then what the function of that type of neuron is. One of the types of neurons are multipolar neurons, and these are the most abundant in the nervous system. All of the motor neurons in the body are multipolar neurons. So that includes somatic motor neurons that go to skeletal muscle, as well as visceral motor neurons that go to smooth muscle, glandular tissue, and modified cardiac muscle. Multipolar neurons are also used as interneurons to communicate between different neurons. The next structural type are pseudo-unipolar neurons, and we have those to thank for our ability to feel pain, temperature, and a whole bunch of other sensations. And the different types of pseudo-unipolar neurons are general sensory and visceral sensory neurons. Then last but not least are the bipolar neurons, and we're not going to talk about them a whole lot today, but those are seen in the special senses like in the ear with the vestibular system, as well as in the retina. So let's take a closer look at each of these different types of neurons, starting with multipolar neurons. These neurons are composed of a cell body, dendrites, which receive electrochemical stimulation from other neurons, an axon that conducts electrical impulses away from the cell body, and axon terminals, which release neurotransmitters into the synaptic cleft to either communicate with other neurons or with a target structure. Then most multipolar neurons have a myelin sheath provided by a glial cell, and that myelin increases the rate that impulses are conducted along an axon. Then there are different types of multipolar neurons, like the somatic motor neurons that innervate skeletal muscle, like our biceps, and then the visceral motor neurons that innervate the smooth muscle of hollow organs and blood vessels and ducts, as well as modified cardiac muscle and glandular tissue. Then the next type of neuron we'll talk about are pseudo-unipolar neurons. And similar to multipolar neurons, they're made up of a cell body, but then there are no dendrites here. Instead, there's an axon with a receptor terminal that receives sensory information from the skin, muscles, and other organs. That information is then conducted along the axon until it reaches the axon terminal. Pseudo-unipolar neurons are also myelinated, just like most of the multipolar neurons. Now let's look at the different types of pseudo-unipolar neurons. The first we'll look at are general sensory neurons, and those do sensory to the skin, particularly with pain, temperature, touch, and pressure, as well as sensory to muscles with pain and proprioception. Then the other type are visceral sensory neurons, which do sensation of hollow organs and blood vessels, particularly with pain, as well as subconscious visceral reflex sensations. And that is it for neurons, so let's do a quick recap. We learned that nervous system tissue is made up of neurons as well as neuroglia, and we also learned there are different types of neurons, like multipolar neurons that are responsible for motor innervation, specifically with somatic motor neurons that innervate skeletal muscle, as well as visceral motor neurons that innervate smooth muscle. Then there are pseudo-unipolar neurons that are responsible for sensory innervation, specifically with general sensory neurons that provide information coming from the skin and skeletal muscles, as well as visceral sensory neurons that provide information coming from smooth muscle, glandular tissue, and modified cardiac muscle. And finally, there are bipolar neurons that help with special senses. And that is it for our recap on neurons.